Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Basics. I am Moe ElHussini, and I am here with my friend George Elias. George, how are you, my friend?
Doing great, Mo. We haven't spoken for a couple of weeks. How's everything going?
I'm good. I'm good. Nothing new. Just wrapping up classes, grading, and getting ready for the summer. Have a summer course coming up, a grad course, and that's about it, really. What about you? What do you have going on?
Well, it seems like the end of the semester always seems to be pretty busy. Grades and
Mm,
final exams and papers and get everything all together for us, right? But
yeah,
it's a good time
yeah.
of year.
Good, good, good. Glad to hear that. Tell me, what's on your mind today? What did you want us to get
Well,
into?
Mo, I was thinking that today we could talk about interviewing.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, yeah, let's do that. Like we haven't actually touched upon that topic since we started. So why don't we? Good, I agree. Do you want to do it? Maybe first look at it from the interviewer's perspective, and then we'll look at maybe the applicant or interviewee. We can get into that afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, one of the things that um, you know, folks don't really realize until they've had to interview somebody is that actually, in some way, interviews are a high pressure situation for both the applicant and the interviewer, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I agree with you. Yep.
yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what your experience with interviewing is, Mo, but I know in my business where it's a large company, oftentimes by the time you get to interviewing somebody, you've gone through multiple levels of management to get, both the requisition approved, and then there's a whole cycle of human resources and the recruiters vetting applicants. And sometimes before you get to the interviewing process, that could be like 3 to 6 months of waiting to actually get the candidate. And all along, you're actually at that point pretty desperate for help. So all you have in your mind is, I really need to get the right candidate, hired here and rolling. And from your perspective, the worst thing that could ever happen is you actually hire the wrong person or hire somebody that can't do the job, because all you want is a little help.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think speaking again, keeping in mind that we're talking about from the interviewer's point of view, the fact that you have an hour or two to make that decision based upon talking to somebody in that hour or two and looking at their resume to decide whether or not this person is a good candidate for a job that hopefully they'll stay in for a long time. I'm not saying necessarily until they retire, but at least if they're going to be there for a long time, it's it's a lot to there's a lot of variables and unknowns that you need to decide and measure in a short time period. And it takes, I think, a lot of finesse and experience for somebody to be able to do so. Because, like you said, you have the 6 months that go into getting the approval for the budget, putting the job description, the skills required, putting all that together, posting it, getting all those resumes that get, submitted on LinkedIn. So, for example, going through them, weeding out the ones that you don't want, and then looking at the ones and all on and on and on to get to that room where you're interviewing several people for that job. I think it's very challenging to decide upon, even personality wise. Is that person the kind of candidate that I want for my job? Is he a decision maker? Can he handle tough situations? Can he delegate? Can he be delegated to? So I agree with you. It's not an easy task to go through.
Yeah, and and on top of that, you end up, like you said, with this 1 hour interview where you're pretty much deciding, you know, this person's going to be working for you. Let's just say if they, spend the next 5 years or 4 years in that role, right? You got to think about it this way. If they're going to spend the next year 4 years in that role or working for you, you're spending 1 hour to determine the next 8,000 hours of a working relationship with that person, right? I mean, 2,000 hours times 4 is 8,000 hours, right? So it's really an odd scenario. So one of the things that I attempt to do as an interviewer is I try to extend out that 1 hour interview time if possible. And I also, I try to get multiple people's perspective. So if I'm the hiring manager, I also try to get other people that I trust to that, especially if they're going to work with this person too, I try to get multiple perspectives. So in my company, normally this person's already had some conversation with the recruiter or with me over the phone, where you can get to know this person a little bit. Then you bring them in, they may have 3 or 4 interviews. And then one thing that I really like to do is I like to have a more informal discussion, maybe over lunch with this person. It makes for a long day, but I find that there are some people that are excellent at that formal interview, and they've practiced and they've honed their skills and they've thought about the stories that they want to tell. And then you get them into an informal situation, and then they spill the beans. You find out that they're really not that person they pretended to be during the interview. And sometimes I find the opposite. I find that sometimes that high pressure situation of that interview is rough for some people, and they don't put their best foot forward in that formal interview. And then they shine in that, that informal setting, and you find out that they are the right person for the job. So I like having a mix of experiences and a mix of people interviewing a candidate, so you can try to get a little more of the different dimensions of what that person is when they're coming in.
See, and the reason I agree with what you're saying, and it goes back, it fills in what I started with about having that 1 hour and just having the resume, is that I'm one of the advocates, or one of the people that believe strongly that the personality of the person and very, 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 very much into whether or not they're qualified for the job, more actually, believe it or not, than their experience. And I'll give you an example, right? So that we can apply what you're talking about, that lunch situation. I could have somebody that is a super duper excellent salesperson, and they're applying for a management job. Now, their resume speaks volumes about how qualified they are as a salesperson, the awards they're won, top 1% in the nation, and all that good stuff. But one of the traps that I notice a lot of companies fall in that I coach is that if they're looking for a sales manager, they automatically start looking for their top sales rep to promote into that position, not knowing that the management skills and requirements are very different from the skills and requirements of a sales rep. So when I do put them into that lunch environment where I sit and I throw at them different scenarios, see how they talk as a manager more than as a sales rep, right? Without just asking questions about, what do you think about sales? What do you think about managing a sales team? But actually have them give and take in a dialogue. I can see a lot more into what their dominant fears are, what their priorities are in making decisions, and so on. Things that I think would come out in a more informal environment than in an interview environment. Do you know what I mean?
Well, so I completely agree with you, but I think there's a little bit of a nuance there, right? And I do think that personality and some traits really do matter, whether this person becomes a good manager. So let's say you're trying to hire from the inside, and you have a really excellent performer in a certain role. maybe something that's, like sales, I'll just say that's like a technical role. There's a certain skill to sales, right? So don't take me wrong saying technical, but could be a technical computer programmer, or, somebody who's just has a certain expertise in how to do something, regardless of industry. That doesn't mean that they're ready to move into a management position, although, even though they're the top performer. What I would say is, in that case, if the next leap for that individual is into a management role, which sometimes I think is unfortunate that there's no, growth path for just pure sales. If they feel like you need to jump into a management role, you should be working with that person early on to help them learn certain management traits if that's truly their next leap, right? Because I really believe that a lot of management can be learned if the person's willing.
Okay. I mean, I'll tell you. Look, this is the scenario I'm thinking about, George. Right? Salespeople are usually very talkative, sociable. They're good in dealing with people, interactive in this kind of environment, right? They know they have a really cheerful personality. They know how to interact with people and so on. I noticed that those people, they're good at sales. They're very good at sales. But when it comes to making a decision, especially under stress, they tend to postpone, and they do not handle bad situations well, meaning as far as assigning blame to the wrong person and so on. And I find that part of their personality does not make them a good manager. Now, adding on to what, let me comment on what you were saying. Grooming them and prepping them to be a manager, so we work on those traits that would make them a good manager. I don't know if a lot of their personality, I want to say tendencies. I'm not saying they're good or bad. It's just we all have tendencies in our personalities. I don't know if some of those tendencies could be changed in someone's personality. I believe that once we get to a certain age, it's very difficult to change us. So I see that, yes, I can train them on multitasking. Yes, I can train them on how to review and evaluate people and so on. But I think there's some aspects of what their job will entail as a manager that will be difficult for me to modify, so to speak. What do you think?
I have a slightly different perspective. I think that a lot of management can be taught through role playing and mentoring and coaching. And I actually think from a company's perspective, and again, we're kind of getting out of the interview kind of thing here. But if you're going to hire from within, I think the company's best approach is to try to groom and educate and mentor and help that person to grow into that position. Because in that interaction, if it doesn't work out, oftentimes people will self-select out of that path and will be forced to say, hey, I thought I wanted to be a manager, but after trying it in a small team or trying some of this management tasks, I realized it's not for me. And I think that's a lot better scenario than out of nowhere deciding that your top salesperson now has to be the sales manager. They fail miserably, and then you have to have a very uncomfortable conversations with that person about how they failed as a manager and whether they want to get demoted and move back and get somebody put in front of them and they end up quitting, right? And I think that's an unfortunate scenario. So I think working with an individual towards their goals and exploring it and trying to help them out through that training, you might be able to find a useful place for them and not lose your best salesperson.
Okay, let's dive into this more when we talk about performance management, because I brought it up because I thought, I was thinking about internal and external interviewing, but let me throw a scenario at you. And then from that scenario, let's talk about what are good interviewing strategies. And this is an actual 100% true situation that happened with one of my close friends that's a senior director at the Department of Transportation. He hired somebody based upon resume, everything looked good, interviewed the person, seemed like a solid candidate, hired him, found out that the person needs a lot of hand holding, found out that he's not very communicative in writing via emails, right? Being a manager, he cannot really relay updates properly to senior management. He found that he's not picking up, he doesn't take initiative to learn unless he is approached to be told, hey, you need to know how to do this, how to do this, how to do this, right? So now that senior director friend of mine is stuck with that person because, just like you said, he went through that 6-month prepping, he went through interviewing a lot of candidates, he hired this person that's now signed up with the company as a full-time employee with benefits, retirement benefits, and on and on and on. He's spent time training him, and now it turns out this guy is not the right fit. So one, the senior director does not look in a perfect top shape to his VP, and at the same time he's stuck with somebody that he does not have the time or the latitude to spend another 6 months training him. What do you think are the takeaway, kind of like the lessons learned or the do's and don'ts from this situation?
Yeah,
I know it's a very big, rich question, but just like some general high-level takeaways that you would get out of this situation.
I mean, this is what I have to say, right? I mean, the interviewer, has to do their due diligence, and I'm not saying your buddy didn't. Even like the best interviewers, can get tricked into hiring the wrong person or get the wrong idea. One thing, like I said, is try to have both formal and informal and multimodal interview scenarios, right? Either over the phone, in person, over lunch. I think that's one way. I think getting multiple people to interview that candidate from different perspectives, it makes for a long interview process, maybe even like a half day. I'd rather spend a half day between, 3 interviews and a lunch than hire the wrong person, because you're with that person. And personally, as an interviewer, as a hiring manager, I personally feel some responsibility for making sure that person can be successful in the role that we're trying to get them into. But one thing that I really, really like to do is, during the interview, I try to ask lots of open-ended questions, and I try to get that individual to tell me, the path and the story they're on. I completely feel as though that there's a lot of people that can get help to put a nice resume together. There's not a lot of people that can get that same exact help with all their stories that they can tell during, a formal interview.
Yeah. Because you can't anticipate all the questions that you're going to be asked or the situations that you're going to be put into. So, yeah. What kind of open-ended questions would you ask, George? Give us some examples.
So it all depends on the role, but let's say it's a managerial role. I might say something like, tell me about a time that you were in a leadership position and you had a difficult person on your team. Tell me about what you did and how you handled that scenario, right? Or I might say something like, tell me about a time where you had to give a client some bad news. What was your approach and what did you do about it, right? So I like to try to find things that they've done and how they would handle that scenario. Have you ever had to work with a very rigid team member?
You know what's a good one I
tell
like
me
to
about
ask
it.
sometimes? First interrupt you. Go ahead, finish up.
No, please. I'd like to hear it.
No, one question I've been recently asking a lot is, tell me about a bad day that you had. Why was it a bad day and how did you deal with it? And I find it really interesting that, again, I'm biased towards how I think about this, but when I link it to the personality, I find that a lot of those dominant personalities, when they're faced with a bad day, they tend to impose on their teams very short timelines, or they tend to try to prove to themselves that they're up to the task and that they can deal with the problem that they're faced with. And most of the time it's because they received criticism that was not fair. And to deal with it, they try to give themselves a task and complete it in a very short time to challenge themselves to show the success, or they push it down on their team. So I think from that question, it helps you see if somebody, if they're having a bad day, do they procrastinate? Do they go head on into the problem to try to solve it? Do they stick their head in the sand and keep pushing it to the day after, the day after, the day after? So I usually get a lot of exposure into the person's personality by I'm also asking them what's a good day, because believe it or not, some people tell me their bad day is when they're given too many things to do without any kind of prioritization or what to do first. And some people, their best day, guess what, is when they're given a lot of things and they're told to deal with it and prioritize it, delegate it, manage it, and they love that challenge. So it's really interesting to read into the person's personality by how they define what a good day is or what a bad day in their job is.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I like open-ended questions like, what do you like to do to rest and recharge, right? You can get a lot from, just how does that person deal with off time? Do they sit and read a book? Do they want to play sports? Do they watch TV? What do they do with their time, right? You can really get some insight into what that person does, right? You can also ask them as a manager, have you ever been in a scenario where you were really worried about something and it kept you up at night? How did you work through that? I mean, I hate to hire somebody and give them a heart attack if they have a high stress job. I want to know this person can deal with some stress and risk and get through it. I mean, I honestly want the best for the interviewer, and that's why we ask so many questions.
So do you think, George, one takeaway so far that we can kind of present to the listener, and you reword it if I'm saying it wrong, but do you think one important takeaway is that when you're interviewing candidates, do not just stick to the job and the job description and the specifics of the job, but get to know the person through such open-ended questions as well, what type of person they are, what type of personality, what their stress limits are, and so on, that you should also focus on those types of questions too?
I completely agree. And I think that as an interviewer, your job should try to get the person to talk about themselves and tell you what their story is and how do they fit into that story and how do they perceive themselves. And I think that if the person during the interview is, doing the proverbial beating their chest and telling you that they're the best thing ever and they have no weaknesses, maybe you should ask them, what is something that you consider to be a weakness of yours, and how are you trying to improve that? Because if the person's not trying to improve, that would be a huge warning sign for me.
Me too. Yeah, if someone says that they have no weaknesses and they think that's an advantage to say so, it's a plus, or they say I agree with you. I think that there are some red flags that we need to look for in between the lines, in between what the people say or their answers to the questions.
So Mo, let me ask you a question, right? So I think you summed that up well. How do you feel about giving tests during the interview?
I don't want to call it a test. Maybe we can call it a test or not. But I have no problem at all giving a disc analysis. You want to call it test, we can, a disc analysis test to get to know the person more, if they're a good, suitable candidate for the job before I even spend time interviewing them. Something like that I would agree with. Someone that's going to be working heavily in programming or software development, I don't see a problem at all having them sit on a computer and throwing at them a case study or a simulation and see how they're going to deal with it. So if you want to call those types of things tests, then I think, yes, we should give tests. What kind of tests were you thinking about that we should give or should not give?
So, I mean, in general, I try to stay away from test as being the sole indicator of being able to get into a good employee. I agree with you that if a certain skill is essential for the job, I'll just, you brought up computers and stuff, but I would say if they were the type of person that had to solder on soldering boards, ask them to show some skills before you hire them, because, they literally will be doing this day in, day out. You can tell a lot by how they might go about doing that, right? Give them a little dry run to see if they can actually do that job, and you can gather their skill level and figure out, do you need to train them first, all right, or is this person that can just walk on? But I think that it's a mistake to hire somebody solely based off of the exam.
Oh yeah.
But let me tell you, but let me tell you a story that I had, and let me see what you think about this. So back when I was freshly graduated college, I took an interview. I won't say the company's name, but I interviewed, and they had me take a couple of exams. One was a personality test, and one was an aptitude test. And it was, they actually called me in for a second interview, which I thought was interesting. The hiring manager brought me in. He actually offered me the job and then handed me my test results. And the test results said that I had the highest aptitude. It turned out that I was studying for my GMATs at the time, and it was like a practice GMAT exam for me. So it was like I'm like, I think I just took this practice test, right? So I scored very high on it, and then it also had my personality as very aggressive, type A personality, and then on the bottom it had an assessment. Don't offer this person the job; they won't be happy. It literally said that, right?
That's funny.
He offered me the job anyway. So he handed it to me. I read it, and I'm thinking to myself, there's no way I'm accepting this job, right? I mean, there's no way I could possibly accept this job. So I thought to myself, well, what would happen if I, what would it take for me to take this job that I'm not going to be happy with? So I instantly just told him, I said, look, I don't think I can accept this job unless you pay me double and give me better hours and give me all this things, and I'm going to have an office and not this, whatever. The guy's like, that's not the job we're offering you. I'm like, well, thank you very much for your time. I'm out of here. But I mean, I was very nice about it. But I was always boggled as to why this interviewer, this hiring manager, would want to hire somebody who just tested that they won't be happy in that job. I mean, I would never do that to somebody. I would actually call them and tell them, hey, just to let you know, this isn't the right job for you, but if something comes up that's better, I'd like to consider you.
I agree. He did like the opposite of what I would have expected him to do. It's interesting.
I mean,
really interesting.
to me, I can't believe he handed me the test results. That's what I'm like. He could have just told me no, they're private, and then, but maybe he did me a favor, right? He was in a position to be forced to give me the job, and he wanted to help me out and let me walk away with my head held high.
That's interesting. That's an experience you would not forget. It's one of those things that happen in our corporate lives that we. Interesting. Look, I know we're almost out of time, and I know what I want to say is, why don't we continue next session podcast talking about, still from the interviewer's perspective, look at maybe wrap up that section by looking at maybe some of the problematic or legal questions, do's and don'ts in that area, and then maybe we can switch it over to look at it from the candidate's point of view. What do you think?
I think that's a great plan, Mo. So let's continue this whole interview thing. I think it's interesting, and I think it's a high pressure perspective. There's legal issues, like you said, and maybe we can get into how an applicant can prep for an interview coming into it.
Excellent idea. We'll do that on the next podcast. Sounds good, George. Sounds really good.
Awesome. So thank you all for listening to this episode of Back to Basics on the Business Edge, brought to you by Feliciano School of Business at Montclair State University. We hope you enjoyed this podcast and welcome any feedback you have for us, including suggestions for future topics.
Thank you, George. As always, it's been a pleasure, and thank you everyone for listening. I will see you, George, next time, and I hope to catch all of you again, all of our listeners on our next Back to Basics podcast. Take
awesome.
care, George.
Looking forward to it. See you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.